Around the world, as promised, a remnant remains, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Welcome to Remnant Podcast.
We're live.
There we go.
Yeah, buddy.
So let's do the podcast, man. You know, it's me and Alan did this for a long time. We took a long break. That was on me, but now we've got a new member.
We do.
That's going to keep things spicy.
A new member of the body. I'm like a big toe.
Yeah.
Maybe a little toe. Maybe a little toe.
We're going to, we're still doing a Christian podcast. We're going to try and make it a little bit more lighthearted than we did before.
Yeah.
Talk about our daily life experiences and how the Bible, directs and guides us and the application of it. Brian, you had an idea to lead off with something today. What was you wanting to talk about?
Yeah, you spoke very briefly this morning about something that you thought was very important for kids to hear, and it really kind of clicked that it's really important for many people to hear.
Yes.
And it was a really good refresher for when we get caught up in what is, commonly known today as like hustle culture, or, when we're tempted to, make a shortcut to get ahead in life. We're really going against a biblical principle and canceling out a promise that God made to us as Christians. And I said, man, we should really talk about that on the podcast, because that is an incredible lesson that people just forget. They just forget. And it's out of Luke chapter 9. You want to read it?
Let Alan read it, because he's got his Bible open, and I was doing all this setup. I don't even have my Bible in here. I'm going to borrow off of yours, man.
Luke chapter 9, it was what,
24
and 25.
25, yeah.
For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and is himself destroyed or lost?
Yeah, and the way that reads in the King James Version, which this is the new King James, isn't it?
Yes.
What does it profit a man, or what does it advantage a man if he gains the whole world but loses himself or is a castaway?
Right.
The lose himself part is the part that stuck out to me. I know in Matthew it says if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul, and it has spiritual and physical applications and everything. But like you was talking about, we're trading off a promise.
Yeah.
When we take a shortcut, but like give us an example of kind of what, because they're thinking, well, what do you mean take a shortcut in life to get somewhere to gain advantage?
Right. Yeah. So you had a really good example in your sermon, but it automatically put me in mind of a time where I was faced with something that was basically in the secular culture, they would call it like an ethical decision or a moral decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're all faced multiple times a day with ethical and moral dilemmas that seem insignificant in the moment, and I would argue that there aren't any insignificant ethical and moral dilemmas. It's always a choice for you it's always a chance for you to choose right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And as Christians, we believe that the Bible is our guiding source for that. And we kind of it takes a little bit of our ability to choose what is right and wrong away when we proclaim that we live by these principles, right? So it put me in mind very specifically of a time when it put me in mind of a time when I had to make a choice that I could have argued either way about the decision, but I knew that in my deeply held beliefs that there was only really one right answer, and it just happens to relate back to we just moved to the area here, and the people that we bought the house from, they still have some property left at the house that they said would be gone. Well, it would be very, very useful to me if I were to have to go, re-procure that and put it to work somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost went and got it and used it, and they would probably be none the wiser and would never even miss it, really. I mean, they haven't laid eyes on it in over a year. So the fact that they would even likely know that it was there is very slim. But it's not mine.
Right.
And there comes a point to when you have to say, when is stealing? And the answer is every time that you touch, that you take something that's not yours. That's when stealing is stealing. Mm-hmm. So, I could have made the argument, they abandoned the property there. Mm-hmm. It's been a year. They've never asked for it. They probably don't even know it's there, right? I could have made all these excuses as to why and justified my reasons for why I did what I did. But at the end of the day, I live by a code, and that code says I don't take stuff that's not mine.
That's awesome, though. You're right. It's not just a faith; it's a code we live by. I mean, we do have a faith.
Right.
Like it's the faith that strengthens us to live the code. But we do have a code that we live by, and part of that code is, well, of course, Christianity really means you're a follower of Christ. You believe in Christ for salvation, but it also means you follow Christ. Like I think about that a lot of times. It seems like in Christianity, and this is the preacher and me coming out, so if y'all disagree, it's fine with me. But it seems like we have comfortably created a separation of the believer but not the follower. And I do understand there's a lot of ways, a lot of room for a lot of things like that. The follower don't mean you're following all the time. But I know, like with other religions, if somebody says they're Buddhist, to me that means they adhere to and practice the teachings of Buddha. That's what they believe in. They pattern their life after what Buddha said. Or if they're a follower of Gandhi or whatever, they believe in the core principles that Gandhi espoused, and they follow them. And so with Christianity, it's not that you're saved by doing it.
Right.
But there is still a call to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So there's still a code, right? Yeah. There's still we're supposed to emulate the ways and the things of Christ. And one of those is integrity, like you're talking about. Integrity. A man keeping his integrity when you're tempted to do something that you can justify. Mm-hmm. Or you think, well, nobody's going to know. It doesn't even matter. It's not going to affect anybody. But it's like, well, if that's true, then just call the person.
Yeah.
Just call them and say, hey, can I do this? But I know with me, the same thing happened, Brian. A similar thing where I wanted to move a fence over a little bit because this guy's land had a clean edge. I didn't have to zigzag through the woods. I could just go over 5 feet and go just outside the trees, And I just was back there and thinking, man, I got all this work to run on my line. But if I just move 5 feet this way, I can fence this in a day, Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm just going to do it because the guy's he lives in Florida. He's never here, and it's not going to hurt nothing. I mean, he's not using this land for anything. But I was back there in the woods thinking about this, and I'm like, if everything that I'm saying is true, then I should just call him.
Right.
Why ain't I calling him? Because I'm afraid he'll say no, and then I got all this work.
Right.
If I call him and then he says no, now I'm actually guilty, but I can, if I do it and he comes later and says, hey, your fence is on my line, I can be like, oh man, I didn't realize it'd be an issue or something. Yeah.
Right.
But we live by a code anyway. Did you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I was going to point out, I don't know if you guys have noticed it, when you're living right, where you're living the way you're supposed to, automatically that you're in the wrong.
Yeah.
That in your thought is like you said, what's the hurt 5 more feet? What's the hurt 5 more feet? But in your mind, you're like, but that's wrong. And like you started out, shortcuts in life. That would have been a major shortcut.
Oh, it would have been a very nice
major shortcut.
Very convenient.
the piece of property that you're talking about, it would have made your life that much easier.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it's like it doesn't matter, I guess, because you can watch documentaries and you're like, what was it? What was that person thinking? Well, they they don't believe the same way we believe.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have that weighing on them. Some people have been doing it the wrong way for so long that they're numb to the voice of the conscience.
Mm-hmm.
You can't hear it no more. When the three of us are trying to do something, the conscience is heavy. We hear it loud and clear.
That's certainly the way it should be.
Well, yeah,
I believe the conscience
absolutely
is a very precious gift of God. Animals don't have it. You know, the raccoon has never felt bad one time for taking my chickens. You know,
nope.
So they don't have a conscience, but we do, and it's part of the image of God in us. That I believe that's part of it. There's a lot of things. What? Women. Let's talk about women.
Wouldn't it be nice if God gave them a conscience too?
It would be nice if women had a conscience.
No, but you're right. Like if the animals don't have a conscience, and it's like Alan was saying, you know, if you consistently make bad decisions that lead you, or not even necessarily bad decisions, right? But if you constantly make decisions that lead you further and further away from that still small voice and that conviction of the Holy Spirit, eventually you just stop hearing it. Mm-hmm. And it's not that, you know, it's falling on deaf ears. You know, Jesus says many, many times, you know, if they have ears, let them hear. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the kind of stuff that he's talking about.
Right.
If you all of a sudden you make this series of decisions that lead you to not having ears to hear anymore, it's not that the Spirit's not talking. It's that you just don't hear him.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good illustration. Take
And that's
your
a
mind.
scary
We're gonna have
place to be.
Yeah, we're gonna have to tighten that up somehow.
Yeah.
I don't have a screwdriver on me right now.
I'll get it.
Just
like
keep
this.
your eye on that. But yeah, what you're saying. Go ahead, Alan.
I was going to say that's a scary place to be,
Right.
to not hear your conscience anymore.
Well, two things I want to bring out. Number one is that's right. It does get numb. Number two, it is a precious gift. Mm-hmm. Your conscience is like an inner. It's watching out for your soul. And in a sense, it's like God. Well, I mean, what it says in Romans chapter 2 that He wrote His laws on their conscience. It says their conscience accuses or excuses them, and so in a sense, your conscience is there for your protection. You start to do something that you shouldn't do, and it says, "Hey, man, don't do that."
Yeah.
It's like you're not even, in a sense. Your conscience is not yours. I mean, it is yours, but it's not like you can just tell it what you want to feel guilty about and what you don't want to feel guilty about.
Oh, I think you can though.
You can train it. Yes, you can train it for sure. Yeah.
But it's not what is naturally written on our heart. That's not our desire. You said something earlier about, you know, a follower and a believer. That's something that North Americans don't have a clear understanding of like what is a follower, because, you know, in when the Bible was written, everybody knew what a disciple was. Mm-hmm. Because every rabbi, or not every rabbi, but most rabbis, they had disciples. They had groups of people that followed them, just like groups of people that followed Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. And those people made a covenant to live like their rabbi. They were followers. They weren't just believers. They were also followers. Right. And that's a context that we lose so much. And so when you stop following the person that you say you're following, then you're not going to live like them anymore.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And that's interesting too, to think about that. They certainly had a better grasp on what a follower was.
Yeah.
And better context, like you said. Okay, but with the conscience, it gets very philosophical. I understand that, so I'm not going to do it. But the thing I was talking about the numbing effect, I was thinking about, like your bare hand is very sensitive. Mm-hmm. And if somebody comes up and puts a quarter in your hand, you feel it instantly.
Right.
You feel it. But if you're holding 100 quarters, because you got all these, each quarter represents an infraction against your conscience. And so you're holding 100 quarters. Somebody can come up and put one more on there and you can't tell.
Right.
You can't tell the difference between 100 and 101 quarters in your hand. You can't sense that anymore. And when we go against our conscience, that's kind of what happens. It's like we begin to load ourselves down with infractions against our conscience, so to speak, or we load ourselves down with guilt, or we load ourselves down with burden even. But you can, rather than face that, and say, I want to get this clean and sensitive again, we like just to justify ourselves. We try and clean ourselves by justifying ourselves and make ourselves feel right about it. We try and help ourselves go to sleep by lying to ourselves. And, the message today was really more towards the younger people in my mind, but just because, man, if I could, there's so many things I have done in my life that if I could undo them, I would.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I've done people wrong at times, and now I will say that everything that has just eaten at me, I've went back to make right. I went back and talked to them or tried to make restitution or whatever. Because when I was young, I was, I made a lot of mistakes.
Right. Who amongst us, though?
Yeah.
Exactly.
But one of these codes it's not, I guess this is not necessarily a code, but it's a character trait that we want to adopt, and that's integrity.
Yeah.
Integrity within your own self. Other people may or may not think you're a man of integrity, but as long as you know that you are, that you will stand for the right things when it's time to stand. And like you're saying, though, it's, for me, it was running into cost on a building project that I knew I could get by with for a time until the warranty's over, and I wouldn't have to face the cost.
Right.
But I couldn't ultimately bring myself to do that guy wrong, even though he didn't know I was doing him wrong. He wouldn't have known. I knew that if I proceed building on this foundation, it's going to be a problem down the road. And, just stuff like that, those principles, man, to me, that's part of what, if there was anything that made the old ways good, the old-fashioned America, if you want to call it that, it was the principles of what they live by.
Right.
Nowadays, a man's good word and a handshake are nothing.
No.
Right.
For most people, but that's what I wish we had.
Yeah, that and $2 will get you a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah, because the $2 is the only thing worth
right,
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I wish that we had that restored, but especially the church should have that.
Yeah.
Among the brethren, we should have that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you brought up a really good point a minute ago. You said that, it gets to a point when you have so many quarters in your hand, you can't feel new quarters being put on. And, there comes a point, I just got back, and I know that you guys know this, but they don't know this.
Mm-hmm.
I just got back a few weeks ago from this thing called Warrior Path, and it's about it deals with this thing called post-traumatic growth, and basically how you grow when you're living with the effects of PTSD. And one of the things that we talk about in there is the difference between shame and guilt. And shame is I am a bad person, and guilt is I have done bad things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we don't believe in a gospel of shame. Right. So the flip side to this is the only way to understand that shame isn't a permanent thing is through disclosure. When you understand that other people have gone through the same thing that you've gone through. And, that's also why the Bible tells us, confess your sins to one another. Mm-hmm. So when you finally come to, and you're just sick of the Holy Spirit beating you on the head with a hammer about, you're just so sick of being convicted. That's what you do, is you go confess your sins to one another. Mm-hmm. And you sit down with a brother and you say, man, listen, I really screwed up and I need to tell somebody about it. Mm-hmm. And then most of the time that person, if they're honest, is going to be like, man, I know, I've been there too.
Yeah.
But we just don't feel like they're going to say that. It's that shame inside of us, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. There is a major difference between guilt. Guilt is a legal term. Shame is a feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? There's a big difference.
Yeah.
And praise God, he can take both away.
Yeah.
But he has means, he uses agency or whatever. But like you was talking about conscience earlier, which, Alan, I want to let you talk. Don't let me dominate the conversation here, brother.
You got something, go.
The conscience can be trained for the wrong or for the right.
Yeah.
And something I've thought about a lot. In here, the Bible deals with the conscience a lot. And I think this is in several places, but I know one is in Romans and others in Corinthians, I think. But he's talking about people for conscience sake couldn't eat certain things because they was grown up or raised to believe this.
Right.
They was raised to believe perhaps pork was wrong or whatever. And so there were certain things they would not eat. And when the new covenant came, and some of the old ceremonial stuff was definitely done away with, because that was all just pointing towards new covenant things, it's, Peter has that vision. If you remember, he has a vision.
Right.
He sees the sheet coming down, and God says, eat. He's basically telling him it's okay to eat. And Peter says, not so, Lord. I've never, let an unclean thing touch my lips or whatever. And he says, don't call that which I've made unclean. And so it's revealed to them, hey, it's okay to eat this. But when they went out, there was other people who had grown up under that old covenant time frame, and they couldn't do it with a clear conscience.
Right.
Because Daddy always said it's wrong.
Yeah.
Can't do it. And Paul tells them, if a man goes against his own conscience, he sinned against his own conscience. That's what he says.
Yeah.
If he eats doubting, in other words, if he's eating it but he still thinks it's wrong, he's actually sinned against his conscience.
Yeah.
But Paul also gives us a solution that with patience and teaching, you can train the conscience to the truth of the new covenant, to the truth of God's word. And I know for me personally, like I grew up, I couldn't wear shorts. I couldn't even wear sleeves that was like shoulder length, and so I had that on my conscience as I became a man, because that's how I grew up. And I still practice a lot of that, but not for sake of conscience, because I don't like getting bug bites, on my calf muscles or something. But
Exactly.
my point was, one day the Bible retrained my conscience for me and said, hey, it's okay to eat pork.
Yeah.
It's okay to wear shorts. Those are not sins. Those are traditions that was put upon my conscience, but God didn't put it there. And that's important to know, because there's a lot of people that come out of what we might call a legalistic religious system, and they just are convinced that if they do this, it's sin. And for them, it would be at that time.
Yeah.
And so you have to bear with them and kind of go through the word with them and let God take that off of their conscience, I'm saying. You see what I'm saying? Y'all can come in, you can comment on that or not, but I mean.
Well, if you, it just came to my mind, this world we live in now is numb to the conscience. Because what the Bible teaches, for years, people may not believe 100% of what's in this Bible, but they all had what was right and what was wrong. And we look at what's going on right now in our school systems and in the government and everything else, and a lot of what is going on in those that's just two examples is wrong. The thought in let me put it this way. The government in a way is feeding us, oh well, yeah, for years that was wrong, but now it's okay if we do this. And that's exactly what's going on. It's going on everywhere. It's not, right now we're talking at a level of just us in our experiences and stuff, but it's going on in a large part everywhere.
Well, like I said, you can train it for the bad or for the good.
Well, that's what
you can sear it, you can numb it, or
Right.
you can make it more sensitive.
Yeah.
And part of the thing to me was that, when it talks about a man losing himself, if he's seeking the things of his own life's interest or whatever, and that his compass is out of whack, his north is south or whatever, you get lost in that. But I thought about this before, Brian. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. You ever heard the term or the phrase, they sold their soul to the devil?
Yeah.
I was thinking about this one day, and I'm sure that can happen all at once, and I'm sure that can truly happen. And in a sense, we was all sold under sin. But it almost seems to me like you sell it one piece at a time. You sell it by going against, like you're doing something that you know is wrong, but you're doing it anyway because it feels good or because you get high on it or whatever. And then you come to another crossroads where something knocks again to stop you, but you're like, no, I don't want to. I'm going on, and I'm going on, and going on, and eventually you just cross the cliff, and you just fall off the deep end. But I'm saying along the way, it's almost like which it really ain't selling your soul a piece at a time, but it's like you're kind of selling out yourself a piece at a time. Because you hear these famous people, in a sense, they just sold themselves out for the fame and for the money. They do all kinds of stuff they never thought they'd do.
Yeah.
But it's because of what they think they're promised if they do it.
Yeah.
Like even couples, like a married couple, married in real life, and maybe she's an actress, and she wants a role in this movie, but she's got to do this certain scene. And she's like, in her conscience, she's like, man, I don't want to do that.
Right.
But then she's like, but if I don't, I don't get this starring role, and this is a big role. This is going to launch my career. And so she goes through with it, and they convince themselves that, well, it's just a movie. I know it's fake. It's okay. But in a sense, you sold a piece of yourself out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sold a piece of your marriage out too, in a sense. And so, anyway, yeah, losing themselves. If you gain the whole world and lose yourself along the way, what does it profit you, man? Nothing.
Yeah, it really doesn't profit you anything. And you're right. I mean, I have theological issues with the statement of selling himself to the devil. Because like that sale's never complete until you die.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
I have theological issues with it too.
Yeah.
I would even have theological issues with saying you sell your soul one piece at a time. I'm just saying these are illustrations. You know?
Yeah. So like no one, this is an anecdote from back in my law enforcement days. No one wakes up in the morning and is like, I've never done drugs before, and today I'm going to go snort coke.
Mm-hmm.
No one starts there.
Mm-mm.
No one starts there. It is, there's gateways, right? And there's all the debate about whether marijuana is a gateway drug or whatever. All that aside, no one wakes up and is like, I'm going to make a bad decision today.
Mm-hmm.
Or don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's some people who do wake up and that's the way that they want to live. But for the overwhelming majority of people, that's just not true. Most people don't wake up and is like, I am just going to go be just the most horrible person I can be today. It is one small step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also the journey back, is one small step at a time.
That's a real good point. I mean, in a personal journey sense. Now, the journey in a sense back is also it's a miraculous thing by Christ, and the grace of God and mercy. But I love what you're saying. Restoration in your own self is one small step at a time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's easy. It would be easy for Christians to sit, and this is where I think a lot of Christians get in trouble is, number one, I think a lot of Christians get in trouble because they expect non-Christians to act like Christians, and they just don't.
Yeah.
Right. So but when someone starts to walk with Jesus, they have a lot of things to atone for, right?
Oh,
or maybe
within the eyes of the people and themselves,
right? Yeah. So like you get someone who has been a thief and a drug addict that gives their life to Christ, and they've been a thief and a drug addict for 20 years, and you think just all of a sudden everything's going to be okay, and that's not the case.
Well, no, because at the very least, the flesh is still an addict, man.
Yes.
It still has its hungers.
A long road.
It's just one single step at a time back. So there's this illustration of, God is on one side and the devil's on the other side, and then there's various spaces in between. So the illustration is there's a difference between being close to God but looking at the devil, but being close to the devil but looking at God, and this one is most definitely better than this one, right? So, I think Christians sometimes get in trouble when they become too judgmental about where someone is in their walk and not fully understanding how far they've come or that they have to go.
I love that illustration. It's basically sounds to me like this: the direction you're headed in matters more than the place you're currently in.
Yeah,
the direction you're headed, because you may be in a good place, but if you're headed in the wrong direction, you're in bad shape. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I also know that, what you said is true. Nobody wakes up today. Well, they don't go from having a sort of, I don't know what you might call a good, clean way of living or something, to just being like, I'm going off the deep end. I'm just going to go from here to right. It's one little step at a time. That's kind of what I meant by selling your soul a little bit at a time. You sell your conscience a little bit at a time. I mean, you're not really selling your soul a little bit at a time. And then also, like you said, until you're dead, you ain't really, the contract ain't done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I have even seen where people from Hollywood had once said they sold their soul for Hollywood or whatever, and now they're like, they want out and they want Christ.
Yeah.
And he's available to them.
Alice Cooper is a great example of that. Alice Cooper right now, if you haven't seen Alice Cooper stuff, Alice Cooper found Christ.
I haven't seen nothing about him.
he has some real powerful testimony. There's a really great website out there called I Am Second, and you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. So I Am Second is basically people's stories about finding Christ, and one of the guys that really kind of helped launch this was a guy named Brian Welch, and he's known as Head in the band Korn. And so
I have heard of that.
Yeah. And
I've heard this story from him, and they say dude's truly born again.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He talks about the way he found Christ is he snorted meth with $100 bill, and was like, I can't do this anymore, and just he found Christ in this questioning, and you know, we got in touch with a pastor friend of his and was like, let's start walking this road together. And it's a really great redemption story of someone who really was living just the most hellacious lifestyle, and is now like, he still tours with the band, he still tours with Korn, but he doesn't tour with Korn anymore. He's not doing all the things that they're doing.
Well, see, that too, like that goes back to something you said earlier. We want to put our experiences, we want to put our shoes on other people, and we want to say, look, man, if you're really saved, you need to get out of the Korn band. But for him, he may see that as ministry. He may see that as, I'm making steps towards God. Bear with me. You know, who knows? He may think, if I stepped out of this, I don't know what he thinks, because I know a lot of times I came up in a very legalistic religion, and I had all these thoughts in my mind that if a person truly gets saved, like everything vanishes, everything is gone, everything is drastically changed overnight. And I do believe God has the power to do that. I just don't think that's the way that he does it. He saves our soul. And if he was just going to do it that way, then why leave us this?
Right.
Like if he was just going to make you all right, you know, well, then you don't even need this. You know, he left you this because this tells you how to get further along in your walk with Christ and stuff like that, and to become more Christ-like. And I'm just saying that a lot of times when we hear somebody that say they gave their life to Christ or whatever, we expect to see drastic, immediate differences. But it doesn't happen that way, man. And the other thing is, you know, like, okay, the way I grew up, if you cussed, you was Satan incarnate. Okay? It was a big deal, right? And like I said, I grew up legalistic. I admit that. But man, it was such a huge deal that we just thought if anybody ever said the D word or something, they'd just go into hell. They just was the son of the devil. You know what I mean? Because it was so strict and everything. And then I became an adult, became a preacher, got saved myself, and I realized, man, there are people that have grown up in a way harder life than I ever had. A police officer, you know, like you were, that's seeing stuff on the streets all the time, and you know, or somebody that grows up in like on the streets of New York City or whatever. Man, that's just the way they communicate, dude.
Yeah,
they don't think nothing about it.
No,
in other words, their conscience don't ever bother them because they didn't have it beat into their head like I did. You know, that's just how they talk to each other. And so when I first started going to church, and I hear these, you know, guys sitting around and they're talking, they're not like cussing like crazy or nothing, but they say a cuss word or something. The first few times, Alan, I was like, should I go pray for this brother? I mean,
is he even saved?
Is he even saved? But they're like, it doesn't. Well, another thing too, and I'm getting off subject here, but I also learned that curse words were words of a curse, like you were cursing someone, like you were sentencing them or wishing evil upon them, you know. In other words, it's no different really for me to say dang it than for you to say the other.
Right.
Ultimately.
Right.
Because I've got my Christian cuss words.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The Christian curse word is still a curse word.
Right. Well, technically, I guess you would say I don't even know that they're actual curse words, because you can look in here about curses and hexes and stuff like that. It's just what we were taught. I guess those words used to accompany curses. Well, I mean, the word damned is a biblical word, right? That they all might be damned or whatever, who love not the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And so in the Old Testament, those would be words of a curse. And I guess that's why they got that name. But a lot of it was what's in your mind, I guess, when you say it, you know?
Yeah.
And for us, it's like, I heard my daughter the other day say, "Dadgummit," and I was wanting to be like, don't you say that, you know? But she's heard me say it, and so I got to clean up my own stuff, I guess. But anyway, yeah, man, that's just my point. It was a real good point, and I'll let you talk, Alan. But small steps towards sanctification, too. like sanctification in this life, I'm saying, or living righteousness. I mean, you're sanctified. There's this issue with Christianity. There's what's called positional,
Right.
and then in the life. As soon as you're saved, you're sanctified forever by one offering, which was Jesus Christ. But then there is the following part that you do become, like you said, you take little steps back towards, I guess you could call it godliness or whatever. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that. We'll save that one for another podcast.
Save that for a different day.
Yeah, we'll save that for a different day.